I'm going to introduce you 1 second.
Okay.
All right. So hello and welcome to the Community Data Programs webinar today, Data Analysis Tools for Rural Communities. My name is Mary and I'm part of the Community Data Program team, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. At any point during the presentation, you can type questions or comments for our presenters or for the CDP into the chat box on the side of your screen. So you can also let us know if you're just having technical problems, and we'll try to sort those out with you. So our presenters today are Nelson Rogers and Robert Leach. So they're actually going to present two projects to us. Nelson and Roger have actually been working together since 1996. They started on a project called Lanark Communications Network. It was Canada's first community-based non-profit public-private coalition dedicated to the advancement of rural broadband network development and applications. So they have been working in these fields for quite a while. Nelson has worked with community groups, nonprofits, social enterprise organizations, local governments, colleges, on issues like community analysis, environmental scanning, applied research, visioning, strategic planning, leadership training, and all within a rural context. Robert is coming from an education background. He's worked as an educator, administrator, an analyst on educational outreach projects, community consultation and capacity building, project partner engagement, strategic planning, and project management, working with many different partners in public and private sectors. So they're really passionate about these projects, and I'm really hoping that you're going to see the potential here in what they're doing. We're looking for hopefully some potential in your own work, and you can see how it might relate, how it might boost your own capacity in what you're doing. And then we're also really looking at how this would be a good partnership with the community data program as a whole, and what the potential could be to work together. The first project they're going to present is a training module, and it's called Big Data for Small Places. And then the second presentation is going to be on a tool called Data Analytics for Rural Transformation. So welcome to Nelson and Bob, and thank you very much for giving us all your time today.
Thank you. We're glad to be here. This is Bob. This is Nelson. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to do a little bit of an introduction in addition to what Mary has shared with you as to how this all came about. Mike Dieter, who most of you, if not all of you know, who is online today, he and my son Jonathan are good friends and have been for many years since they met at McGill. And as it turned out, we got into a conversation, and one thing led to another. And Mike shared with me the work he was doing with the Community Data Program. And that resulted in us meeting with Michelle, the CEO, and talking about how we might work together going forward. We feel that what we're going to present today is very much a collaborative kind of joint venture potential. We have no formal agreement between ourselves and the Community Data Program, but we feel that there is a synergism there that we would like to explore further. What we want to do today is to let you know what we've been doing, and we acknowledge that many of you online today are fairly expert in the field of data and data analytics. So we're not going to pretend that we're going to know more than you do about this sort of thing, but rather share with you how we've been approaching this over the last few years. We're hoping that this will be of interest, not only to you personally, but perhaps to the people you work with. I think probably more so the outreach kind of programs that you do. I also wanted to share with you that during our discussions with Michelle and Mike, we did touch on the strategic plan that the Community Data Program has. I believe it's still a draft plan, although we went online today to see if there was a final one and couldn't find it, but perhaps it already exists. However, the point of me bringing it up is that in there's a section on training and capacity building. which talks about basically data literacy. And that's really kind of the focus of what we're going to talk about today. So that's kind of a quick introduction as to how this came about. And Nelson, would you like to add anything to that?
No, that's good.
Okay, so let's begin. And first of all, big data for small places is a term that's really kind of caught on for us. We've had a lot of good results from that terminology. Interestingly enough, Mary Clark, the lady who introduced us today, brought up an interesting concept when we spoke not too long ago. We kept referring to big data for small places in the rural context. And while that's our primary audience and objective, we also were reminded by Mary that there are a lot of communities within urban centers. So smaller communities as part of larger urban centers have some of the same data issues as rural communities do. So interesting kind of perspective that we took to heart, and we've been talking more about that more recently. So it's this program, and it is a program, and I think off the top we want to mention that this isn't really a traditional course. It's not where we have a curriculum per se, but we do have a very strong framework, which we'll talk about momentarily. But it's more of a capacity building program than a course. So as a capacity building program, our focus is around accessing data, where to find it, analysis of data, and then ultimately how to present it and visualize it. The purpose of our big data for small places is facilitating data literacy. We know that it enhances the user experience. We've found that as we've presented this program in a number of locations, and it improves people's experience with data access, analysis, management of data, and presentation of data. So we want to try and deliver to you today what we feel this might have for your organization, for you as a person who works in the world of data, and to take a closer look at what our program, Big Data for Small Places, is all about.
So Bob and I have worked in rural research and consulting together for several years. Before that, I worked for Algonquin College for about 30 years, and a chunk of that was at a rural campus, and I also worked with a network of rural college campuses. And our approach has been to try to listen to what we're hearing from rural communities and then respond to local needs. So we're a little bit in the mold of what I call unconsultants, where we're trying to use our consulting services to help our clients use consultants less. So we listen to what municipalities and community organizations were telling us about their data issues. And what they were saying is that there's so many open data initiatives. We're located here in Ontario, and OMAFRA, Ontario Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, has over 200 open data products available just in one ministry of the Ontario government. So increasing availability of data, and data in a lot of different kinds of formats. And accompanying that is community groups are facing increasing requirements to use data, that you can't apply for a grant, can't complete a grant application or complete an annual report without extensive use of data. And many groups are finding they're contracting that out because they don't have the internal capacity to deal with that. Of course, this is all under the theme of evidence-based decision making, and that's increasingly important for a lot of organizations. And what we were hearing from the groups that talked to us was that they felt they were missing opportunities or missing a deep understanding of their local community because of their lack of capacity to deal effectively with data. And as a result, we're often relying on popular opinion and local knowledge rather than what some might consider hard facts. So we took all of this into consideration in designing the program. We used instructional design expertise from a college and from some retired instructional design experts that we happen to know personally, and we put this into a program format that can easily be shared and replicated. I guess that the situation we're dealing with is on the slide about the challenge of the confusion information graph is a U-shaped graph, and we found as we're dealing with community groups, some feel they're high on the confusion level because they don't have enough data, and some feel they're high on the confusion level because they have way too much data. And we're trying to work with groups to help them find that spot where they're comfortable with having adequate data and adequate local understanding to make reasonable plans and evaluate their programs adequately. So our goals for the Big Data for Small Places program is really about building capacity, not about reliance on external expertise. We use a series of activities around mentoring, some training modules, and largely around networking. And so the community data program is an example of one of the networks that we refer people to, but there are a number of data-related networks that local groups find useful, and we have some tips on how to identify the right networks and how to use them, how to understand the relationships between local and distant networks. We also find that 20th century community development, this is a broad brush statement, was largely siloed into compartments of economic, social, or cultural development, where the 21st century community development is more integrated and requires a broader understanding of various issues that can feed into evidence-based decision-making. So, as Bob mentioned, ultimately the program is about increasing data literacy. So, how does it work? Each working group that comes into the program has to have an actual work priority, a challenge, an opportunity, a question, an assignment. Sometimes it's a grant application or something, and they bring a real project to the session to work on. And then we coach them through the process using something that matters to them. So it's different from an academic course where the group work is theoretical. Working groups have come to us wanting to be people together, sometimes by agency, by employer, sometimes by geography because they're working with a common issue around a particular locality, sometimes as small as a village or a neighborhood. We've had some interesting groups come together by theme. For example, the rural school closure theme attracted people from quite a wide geographic range because there were a lot of different communities in different places, and people interested in the work for different reasons. And then the program works through a process of consultations with individual working groups before the group session starts, then a series of workshops, and then the facilitation of networking that will continue on after the program ends. So we have a kind of a handoff process. We've developed a process map that gives some guidance, and this is explained in much more detail in the workbook that we've produced for this. There's a user handbook that was produced with some assistance from Rural Ontario Institute and the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs, but just walking through how you determine community need. And we've adopted some modules from some training that's been quite successful in the UK in training groups around county services on how you determine what a community needs. Then some processes around finding information and finding the right balance between, say, official statistics and local knowledge, and confirming that the information that's been found or provided, in some cases the groups find they have information data reports dumped on them, and they have to sort through to find what's most relevant, and then working through refining a direction. We use the metaphor of a funnel around the direction setting, because we find groups often come into this process with pretty broad general goals. So, I want to make the world a better place, sort of goals, and we help them work through, let's work this down to something that has an achievable goal and measurable outcomes and visible results, and to kind of refine the direction that way. And then the address challenges section is there's always some bumps in the road where some groups come along and say, well, what we found out was a complete surprise to us. Now we realize we've got to rethink some of the things we're doing before we get into an action plan. And so we have some processes that we help groups work through on getting over some bumps in the road, and actually by the end of the program they should have an actual action plan, something that they can take home and work on. So that's the process in a nutshell.
We're going to switch over to Bob here now, and I guess one of the things that's really important about this program is that we talk about data plus inference equals information, because so often you have to apply local experience, local knowledge to make sure that the data is relevant to what it is you're applying it to. So that's one of the areas that we try to strengthen people's thinking around. So we begin the program with a community consultation. So before we have the entire group in one room, and this is an in-person kind of program, we are working on the idea of having this as an interactive online version of this, but at the moment that doesn't exist. That's certainly one of the objectives we have. But before we bring the groups together, and typically we'll have groups of 5 or 6 in a working group, and we'll have 5 or 6 groups. So anywhere from 25 to 30 people typically take part in one of our sessions. They may be working on different projects and different focus, different topics, and they may be from different organizations working together or from one organization. It depends on the circumstances. So we send out an invitation initially to put together a community consultation, and we find the people who are interested in clusters of the teams that are going to be brought together, and we start the process by meeting with them individually before we get into the classroom situation. This helps us identify, first of all, their level of knowledge and where they are on the continuum. They may be very experienced, they're not experienced at all, so we like to know those things. And we also hope to try and help them focus their attention. So we provide background to the program so they understand what they're getting into. And then we explore the prospective list of projects. And that's really an important part here, because Nelson was mentioning that sometimes people bring a too large an issue to the table, and we have to help them sort of narrow it down and make it manageable so that they can be successful. So they're either addressing current challenges or they're looking at supporting initiatives that they're starting. So it could be anything from a new program they're trying to introduce, or one they're trying to grow, or one that they're trying to defend in terms of funding. We, of course, then solicit participation and we answer questions that they have. So this opening session or consultation is really meant to strengthen and bring people together so that we can get each of the working groups more focused and so on. Now, the last point about working group members, we learned, and this was, we got this feedback from the sessions we've done previously. Initially, this wasn't a focus we had, but it's become one. And that's the makeup of the groups, of the working groups. Typically, we will want to see that they've got a mixture of some of the, and we're talking about skill sets here, not individuals. Clearly, we don't always know who the individuals are, but we want them to have some skills in communication. We would like at least one person on the team to have some research skills. Might be a public librarian, it might be someone who just simply has that background. We want someone to be on the team that's a content expert of whatever the focus of their group is. So if it happens to be rural transportation, that somebody on the group knows something about rural transportation and the issues around that. So this is examples of the kind of makeup of the working groups. So we look at how questions can be addressed, and we're interested in what the issues can be addressed with data and analytics. We know that some things are not going to be easily addressed by data and analysis. So we try to identify those questions. We look at how data can improve or understand the community needs. We have a whole chart. It's in the workbook, but Nelson could maybe speak to that just for a second to talk about community needs.
Well, as I mentioned, based on the training modules that have been used in the UK, we have a framework for understanding community needs and how to choose an approach that's appropriate to the project or the organization. So in some cases, community need is established by expert opinion. This is, particularly around things like measles vaccination. You want expert opinions on what level of vaccination the community needs to be resistant to an outbreak of measles. In other cases, it's a more comparative approach. How does our community compare with what other communities have? So are you comparing to a similar community? Are you comparing to provincial averages? Are you comparing to national averages? And why did you pick those comparisons, and why is that an appropriate way of defining community need? In other cases, it's responding to spontaneous demand. That has your organization had a lot of people who've inquired about something, and this is what they believe they need, and this is what they're asking for, and is that provide enough information to develop a program to address it? Ontario 211 has just done a study of that around people who call 211 requesting help with something for which there doesn't seem to be an obvious answer. So that data provides some information about spontaneous demand. So then we have sometimes responsive demand is an indication of community need, where you go out to a community with a survey or with interviews or with focus groups and particularly probe an issue and see what comes up with that. So anyway, we have 5 approaches to assessing community need and some guidelines for picking an approach that is most appropriate, and then using that as a framework for understanding what data do you need to verify that, and how would you communicate the results of your findings. That's just an example of one of the modules.
We're probably repeating ourselves here because we, of course, also try to make sure that people know where to find relevant data, reliable should probably be there as well, reliable, relevant data. And that's sometimes a mystery, depending on the teams. Some of the working groups might have someone on their group that's got some expertise here, but many of them do not, and they simply are not aware of where they can go. There's usually the obvious places they can go, like Stats Canada, but there are so many other good, reliable sources, as I'm sure you all know, being part of the community data program. But when we meet with municipalities, particularly in small rural areas, or community-based organizations in rural areas, many of them do not have that capacity, that understanding. And then how can you turn it into useful information? Some of these points we've talked about a bit already. And what indicators are useful in a rural community development? We find that some of the indicator systems that are out there, we can use some examples of this. There's one that the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs has that's on community, I'm going to forget the name of it now.
The Newcomer and Youth Community Indicators, that system's been mothballed because one of the reasons is that a large percentage of the indicators were really developed for urban areas and didn't translate well to rural areas, so that you ended up with these indicator systems and scores that didn't really show the picture of what the community situation was like on the ground.
And the last point here is that how can you communicate what you find? So the whole notion of visualization of data into charts, maps, graphs, etc., is extremely important. And we were just, before we started this webinar today, we were on the Community Data Program website, and there's a section there talking about taking the data and putting it into a visual format. And so that's what we're talking about here as well.
In addition, we talk about communicating it to the appropriate audience. So sometimes you're preparing an internal report that's going to be used by the administration of your organization. Sometimes it's municipal staff preparing a report for elected officials. Sometimes it's a report to the general public. Sometimes it's part of a fundraising initiative or an issue awareness initiative. There's different kinds of target audiences and different kinds of communication strategies, and we refer people to further resources on that, but we like to leave them with some general guidelines around clarification.
So a little bit about the program design. So I've mentioned previously that we usually have 4 or 5, sometimes 6 working groups. Often it's within a county, but we also look at geography in what we refer to as the functional community. So we live in the town of Perth, Ontario, which is midway between Ottawa and Kingston. And if you're familiar with that area, you'd know that when you talk about looking at your community of interest, it may very well be a functional community, not a political boundaries geography community. We want to make sure that people bring a real practical problem to the table. Our experience was with when we started this program, we had one team who came with a vague idea about what they wanted to do, but it really wasn't something that they were at that point trying to resolve or deal with. And so it was more theoretical and hypothetical than practical. So we really emphasize that it needs to be practical. And it's also a selling feature, because the resistance today is, why do I go and participate in this program? I haven't got time. But if you're taking something to that program, this program, Big Data for Small Places, you're already working on, and it'll help you accelerate the process of addressing the issues or questions, then it's actually time on task, as opposed to just simply going to an event that might be interesting but not particularly immediately useful to you. And we coach on team formation, the clarification of the goal, And then there's 3 full days of in-class sessions, and we bring in experts. So once we know from our consultation process, that we start with, that we know what the areas of focus and the topics that are going to be dealt with, we try to find guests that are willing to come and speak to the sessions. And we've had absolutely no pushback from this at all, because the people we usually approach already have as their mandate to try and do outreach to the kind of questions that are being dealt with. So their expert opinion and their knowledge and experience can be brought to the table and help within the context of applying data to the question. Between the in-class sessions, we do provide not major homework, but we do give each group assignments so that they go away and they work on what they've learned so far and bring it back to the next in-session class session. And we've developed a very extensive list of other organizations dealing with similar problems or concerns. And they often are ones that people would know, but not always. And we've had some classic examples there where we were dealing not too very long ago with a Parks and Recreation question, and we were able to point the group to other examples and best practices elsewhere that they could use as comparators or to find more information, and sometimes create a network that they hadn't had before. After we do the in-class sessions, we do a follow-up consultation. So this is done with each individual group, not as a whole. And that's on purpose because we then try to help that team who have come up with an action plan as to how they're going to transition that into, or a plan, how they're going to transition that into action. So that's an important step, and maybe further consultation is required or further information is required. So we learn that in the follow-up consultation.
So here's some examples of some topics that were the focus of working groups in our pilot project in 2015. So the active transportation group, and that's an interesting example of the kind of funnel approach, because the group, the municipality had produced a transportation master plan that covered absolutely everything from roads and bridges to commuters to sidewalks and a lot of different things. And this working group wanted to do something specifically around active transportation, and we helped them work through clarifying their goals, setting achievable goals, targeting some visible results, targeting results that would be stepping stones to larger goals. And by the end of the program, they'd focused on getting a designation as a cycle-friendly community. So going from a very broad general interest in transportation to a very specific outcome was part of their process. And then Bob alluded to this one, managing demand for parks and recreation. And this was in a small community that was growing, and their historic figures didn't really predict what their future demand would be, and they were trying to work around that. And we put them in touch with some province-wide groups that were researching trends in parks and recreation demand. And we also were able to connect them with some resources around getting a better handle on their own record keeping and their own internal data, so they could use it more readily for planning purposes. That group told us that they cut their consulting budget in half after they participated in the Big Data for Small Places program, because they realized there was so much they could do internally by building their own data literacy skills, and so much free resources they could obtain from other networks that they could really reduce get better results with fewer consultants. So that was a success for us. Yes, we had another one around indicators of mental health and mental health related issues that were particularly appropriate to a certain geography that this social service agency was working with. Then we had one around community attractiveness, and that was, it started out as an immigration program, but ended up being more focused on secondary immigration. If you work in rural areas, you often know that people come from other countries, come to Canada, and they come to the big cities, and then after they've kind of settled in and found their place in their career or whatever, then they're more interested in relocating to a rural or small town area. And we looked at some ways of indicators of welcoming communities that would facilitate secondary immigration to rural areas. And then another one on well-being of children and youth and some indicators of well-being. So they started off with some pretty broad topics and ended up with some fairly concrete action plans as a result of the project. In our a more recent group, just for example of the kinds of things that were dealt with, the working groups work with school closures and work particularly on what are the how you measure the impacts on a community of the value of having a school or losing a school, and what are the related factors. The same thing around the value of trails. There's been a lot of trail development in Eastern Ontario, both hiking trails and trails for motorized vehicles, ATVs, and so on. And how do you estimate the value of a trail to make a reasonable decision on the cost benefit of investment in trails and its impacts on the attractiveness and the well-being of the community? We looked at some rural transportation issues and options, and some of the groups came to the table wanting to talk about commuters and commuting to work, but the rural transportation issues are much more complex than that, where you have people that need transportation for medical reasons, for social service reasons, for retail reasons, for recreation reasons, and need to look at the breadth of service to the entire community and in the area. And then this was an interesting one. Seems rather technical compared to some of the other ones, but it was communal services around shared water and wastewater facilities, typically for 6 to 24 homes, typically adjacent to a village that does not have municipal services. And again, looking at the impacts of setting up a communal service system and what that means for not just the population and the assessment value of the real estate assessment value of the village, but other spin-off benefits to the village, where it can be have impacts for the schools and for the availability of volunteers and so on. So lots of impacts of what seems to be a rather technical issue.
So these are some of the more recent topics that, again, these topics, of course, have been around before, but they are ones that have become more prevalent more recently, and certainly in our region. And so these are some of the new ones that that we've discovered.
Yes, well, these are just topics that have come to us for consideration with housing access, lots of housing issues, and affordability in the broadest sense, not just meeting some of the technical definitions of affordability, and some work with vulnerable populations in different ways, vulnerable due to economic, social, medical issues, age-friendly communities, and communities that support aging in place. We've had different kinds of questions around rural transportation. Rural broadband has been a more recent one that's come back on the table again. There have been some initiatives on this field that have made some progress in some areas, but we work in areas of complicated geography and sparse population, and where rural broadband is still difficult to access. Economic development, and particularly economic development around functional communities rather than just by municipal boundary, and some things around health services. There's quite a number of things that have come to us lately, and social planning, value for service, and those questions have come up. And then more recently, some climate change mitigation issues, and we're just close to where we live. We're experiencing an unusual record-breaking flood season, and it seems to be climate change related. And we're looking at issues around climate change preparation and mitigation, adaptation.
So probably you could almost draw your own conclusions and assumptions about what the benefits of this program are, and especially those of you who work in this field as much as you do. And on the survey at the beginning of the program, over 80% of you are working with data all the time. But we feel that the working group focus on current data-related challenges really helps them get their minds around the potential that data has in resolving their issues. We're obviously emphasizing the better use of readily available data and analysis. And we try to run the sessions as close to home as possible. I mentioned about us having an online version at some point. That would allow us to do more outreach across the country. And we're hoping that we may be able to work with the community data program in the future. The combination of in-person and online, we think there needs to be a balance. In-person is always good, particularly in the consultation sessions. But I could see us taking a good deal of what we've done in our workbook that we've written, and we're working on a facilitator's manual as well, that those could be, of course, used online. And then exposure to experts in the relevant fields. Of course, we mentioned networking before, but we did the follow-up evaluations to each session that we've done. And the one that came back very strong was the opportunity for networking and collaboration that resulted by having people in the room that were doing similar things. Sometimes not just the topic, but rather the challenges and where they were finding the data, how they were using data, how they were visualizing it, even if the topics were different. And then, of course, the networking with other people in other places. Improving data literacy, productivity. This is a particularly important one because certainly in Ontario, but I'm sure elsewhere, the pressure on particular municipalities and community-based organizations to do more with less. Unfortunately, that seems to be the trend. But by improving the productivity of your use of data, sometimes can help resolve some of that. And reducing dependency on external consultants. We saw evidence of that over and over again. We also touch on the guidelines for ethical use of data. Those of you who work with data know that at a certain point you have to be careful about how you extract particularly personal data, and the smaller the numbers, the more difficult and challenging this becomes. So we do talk about this, and guidelines for ethical use of data is part of our program. Communication strategies. How do you communicate most effectively in data visualization? And in fact, we had a video that we were going to use today, but unfortunately it's too long. We decided to we can send you the link to it on data visualization that you might find interesting. And these are the lessons learned. Team formation was really, really positive That was really a major part of the success. The startup and follow-up consultations really helped people get focused in the beginning and to find results at the end and take them forward, and then to have a well-defined program. Those are the three most important feedback items we got from our participants in the sessions we've run.
Yeah, so we always get questions about what does it cost, and the pilot that worked out the design and testing of this program was heavily subsidized by OMAFRA through the Rural Economic Development Capacity Building Program and by our local Community Futures Development Corporation. Then the workbook and the research that went into producing the workbook, and if you download the workbook from the Rural Ontario Institute website, the links in it for further information, additional resources, and those are live links built into the workbook. And all of that research and development that was paid for by the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs through the Measuring Rural Community Vitality Initiative. A companion volume was also produced under that same program, and some of you may know the name Ray Bowman, who was head of rural statistics at Statistics Canada for many years, now works as semi-retired like us, and works part-time with Rural Ontario Institute, and has developed this guidebook. It's I refer to it as Yellow Pages for Rural Data, but it's a guidebook for how to find data on local issues, and that was also funded under the same program. We worked on the development of those together. Now there's lots of variables in how much this program costs to deliver, but we generally find that the costs work out to be about $5,000 per working group. But some cases there's because of the nature of the program, there's subsidies available, or we'll find a community group that donates space and technical support, different things. So the price, it can be quite variable, but that's just kind of a ballpark figure of what it costs to deliver the full program. So we're looking at expanding the availability of the program, and we have sketched out a concept for a facilitator's guide and a facilitator mentoring program. We have applied for funding to support that. That's been unsuccessful so far, but we have a list of people that have come out of the woodwork that have said as soon as the facilitator program is ready to go, they'd like to participate in it, and we think that this is really the way this needs to go in capacity building, in that local groups and local organizations excuse me, should have their own in-house facilitator that can work a group through the Big Data for Small Places process, and we would be available as resource people and as mentors, but that we wouldn't need to be directly involved in the delivery of this program. And we've had inquiries from this from quite a number of areas, from different groups in Manitoba, Nova Scotia, Ireland, Kenya, Norway, other places. And we've had a number of requests around a specific version of this in Big Data for Small Business. And we've sketched out a format of concept paper around what that might look like and what kind of partnerships we'd need to bring that forward. So we've got lots on the table of what we'd like to do in the future, and we think that working with the community data program may very well be a good step toward that.
We're going to probably come back. We're going to come back to an example when we talk about the next section of our presentation today on data analytics for rural transformation. We're going to talk about some of these factors that are here that you see under the Frontenac County data analysis. So I think we'll just skip ahead because we don't want to run out of time. So
Yeah,
we
okay.
had some questions for you, but I'm going to stop there, Mary, if you want to pick it up.
Sure, yeah. Do you want me to switch over to the other presentation now?
Yeah, so the question is, do you want to take any questions on this program first, or do you want to just do them both and then do the whole thing?
Well, there's no questions right now in the chat box, so I would say let's keep going, and then we can always come back to this during the questions, because we're almost at, I'm doing time conversion in my head. We're almost at 2 o'clock, so let's get going, because I do want to get through the next part of your presentation.
Okay.
Okay, so give me 1 second, everybody. I'm going to bring up. As we said, this is actually two distinct projects that certainly work very closely related to each other, but this is the second part of it.
Yeah, we'll quickly make the linkage between the two. So all of the work we've done with big data for small places and our hands-on in person work with community groups, what became apparent was that there was something else missing, and that was a tool that would allow for collecting, analyzing, and visualizing data. And that's so what has happened is that we have developed this program called Data Analytics for Rural Transformation. So we're going to walk you through this. This isn't going to take nearly as long as the Big Data for Small Places presentation. So we should have time for questions at the end. So we have formed a new company. Nelson and I have worked separately together collaboratively, but worked separately through our own personal companies. But more recently, we formed Community Transformation Associates. And the purpose of that is to have a common place where we'll have our consulting services, but also this DART project and the Big Data for Small Places, among other things I expect as time passes. So what we saw was the challenge that we saw in rural municipalities and community organizations, or smaller communities within urban centers, as Mary pointed out to us, is that they have access to a lot of data from many sources in different formats. The need to use data was, as we've talked earlier, about for evidence-based decision making and support of their programs and their application for funding or budget. Their need to increase productivity and improve efficiencies. And they're under a lot of pressure to use data. And the data pool of data is significant, and it's a challenge for many of them to manage that properly. And they have limited in-house resources, some of which we've talked about under Big Data for Small Places. When we talked to municipalities and community organizations, they told us they would like to have a user-friendly data integration and visualization tool. They wanted to be able to report using custom geography as opposed to municipal boundaries. Often it was functional community was more important to them. They wanted the flexibility to be able to use it for land use planning, economic development, social services, and more. And they wanted to be able to access regular updates so that they were current with the data they were using. And surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, the number one visualization tool that many of them wanted was map-based. Not always, but often was. So we created Data Analytics for Rural Transformation, DART, and we describe it as a user-friendly, cloud-based data integration visualization tool to import data from in many formats into one interface for search and display. So my common description is it's like a harvesting tool. It'll go out and harvest the data, bring it into one place, into one visualization, one interface so that you can look at it, one dashboard, and then manage the process for visualizing it and analyzing it and visualizing it. So I
should point out, and we'll mention this again a little bit later, but the development work to develop this tool was done by the Applied Research Group, the Data Analytics Center at Algonquin College in Ottawa, and the Algonquin College Applied Research got a major NSERC grant for applied research in data analytics. And we took this, the results of focus groups that we had done with rural communities about their search for a data tool. We took those results to the college, and they put a group of professors and students on this, and the DART system was developed by the college for us based on the feedback and input that we provided. So the DART tool is capable of importing community profile data, different kinds of geographies and custom geography options, can incorporate locally generated data, so that one of the townships that we work with has a system called Citizen Scientist, where they have people that are designated to collect data on very specific things and report it to the township. And they wanted to be able to incorporate that data into other official data to get a better picture of what's happening in the township. We have multiple menus about how to do queries around demographics, around land use, around specific features, around proximity, and then we have a number of options in visualizing the results of the queries. So the login screens and the user interface screens were developed for us by the college. A lot of these were student projects, students in different programs, interactive multimedia design, and in computer science, computer programming. And we have screens that can give you access, and we have the ability to compartmentalize the data. So if there's, for example, confidential social service data that was uploaded to the system, only the people who are authorized to see that would be able to see it in the DART tool, where there might be other users that could see economic development data that would be not as confidential. Then we have the ability to, in the map view, you can build up layers on a map. So if you're dealing with an issue of where to put a certain kind of business, you maybe want to establish an outfitter business in a rural township, you can build up layers on the map on which villages have a high percentage of young adults, which villages have access to a public boat launch, which villages already have an outfitter, which villages have other features of land that's zoned for commercial use or whatever. And you can do a number of queries and build it up on a map, and start to see a cluster of points around certain issues, and that can really simplify the decision making. Just another quick example of how the map has been proven to be useful. Frontenac County looked at response times to 911 calls, and which they had all the numbers and the success rates and percentages and everything, and overall the statistics look quite good. But when they put the results on a map, they realized that there were some hot spots where the 911 response times were not as good, and they were really clustered in certain areas that became highly visible on the map. And the issues had a lot to do with cottage roads and cottage country, poor road maintenance, poor signage. Really had nothing to do with the quality of work done by the first responders, by the volunteer firefighters, or that there were other issues that were relating to the problem. And it was only when they saw the data on the map that they were really able to understand what's the core problem and what kinds of solutions would be helpful. We also had requests for different kinds of table outputs, because often the data analysis that's done in a tool like this needs to be output into a report that goes somewhere to a government department or goes to council. So we've built in different kinds of table generation features. then different kinds of graphing features. Next screen there. So we have line graphs, bar graphs, pie graphs that are options for outputs from the data that comes out through the tool. So we had an initial kind of quick and dirty prototype put together by the Applied Research Center at Algonquin College in the summer of 2017. We have that being field tested. It's not particularly user-friendly, but it really proved its value and what it could potentially do. So we used the learning from the prototype to develop a more sophisticated version, much more user-friendly, much more elegant system. That was most of the development was done in the summer and fall of 2018, and we're just in the process of working towards the release of that. We're right now working through some system integration and testing, a few glitch fixes, and we're very close to having this available on for commercial release. And we have been accepted into the Canary program for cloud service to have access to a very robust federally sponsored cloud service that we can use for this for testing with our early adopter clients before we go to a full commercial release. And we're looking at that. We're probably a few weeks away from making that available to a select group of early adopter clients.
So at the moment we have one dedicated programmer working on the linkage between the back-end system and the front-end system, the dashboard. That work is probably going to be complete within the next 3 weeks. And then we'll have a model, or not a model, we'll have a product that we can demonstrate. And so if that interests you, at the end of this session, if you wanted to let us know about your interest, we'll make sure that you're notified when the time comes that we could do a demo online for you. We're planning that the cloud service, the Canary service is a federal government department, if you're not familiar with Canary. They deal with all things relating to Canada's involvement in the internet, rules, regulations, policies, etc. But they also do have a research center, and they have approved us to be on their secured service to do the test run-ups and so on before we go commercial, and that's going to be happening imminently, probably next week. And that'll be there and they provide technical advice around certain features that we may want to build upon, such as using artificial intelligence for combing for updated data from the sites that provide that service. So that's our immediate situation, and the advantages that we see of this tool is that we firmly believe that it's going to create some real efficiencies for those community organizations and municipalities that struggle with data collection, analysis, and integration and visualization. So we're expecting that's going to really be of particular interest to them as we move forward. And that's basically it. That's us.
Go back one slide.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to go back. Hang on.
So when we developed the DART organization based on focus groups with potential users, but since it's been promoted by Algonquin College as an example of what their applied research group can do, We've had some interest with several federal government departments and agencies that are looking at the DART tool to simplify the collection of local data and the formatting of it for submission to government departments. As for example, Statistics Canada doesn't have the same type and the same number of field researchers that they used to have. And there are things that come up through local research with the community groups are doing that it would be useful if it could be incorporated in alongside Statistics Canada data. But there aren't easy systems right now to verify the validity and the reliability of locally collected data and putting it into a format that's easily incorporated into government data sources. So they've been talking to us about adding some features to the DART system to do that. So we had envisioned DART mainly as a data pull system, pulling data down from open data sources to make it useful at the community level. Now we're seeing some interest in data pull the other direction, pulling local data out of the communities and submitting it to departments and agencies. So it's been a fascinating project to be involved in, and by using the college students and college applied research, we've been able to keep the development costs down so that we expect to be able to bring this to market at a very reasonable price point that small community groups could afford. There are some commercial products out there that are available for data integration, data visualization that are quite expensive and not really flexible for rural community use. And there are some groups that are struggling away trying to develop their own internal systems to do this. And it's quite inefficient for each group to try and invent their own system. So we think that by making this available, we can really support more effective use of data in rural communities and by community groups.
I guess I should mention that we have a website under construction. It'll be under the new company name, Community Transformation Associates, and it will have a section in it with DART. And what we're going to do is that is being constructed now, and we'll hope it'll be ready at about the same time that we're able to release the first version of DART very shortly. And so we're looking at probably 6 to 8 weeks at the most. And so if this interests you, please let us know, and we'll make sure that you at least get the announcement. And if you want to follow up, that would be wonderful. We're really excited about this project, and we've talked to a lot of people who are in this world of data, particularly Stats Canada, the Standards Council of Canada, and in fact, interestingly enough, the National Defense, but particularly as it relates to a national public safety and security. So there's a lot of interest in this project, and we're hoping that your group will find it of interest as well. So that being said, I think we're able to take questions if you wish.
Thank you very much, Bob and Nelson. That's great. I think that's a lot of information for people. We do have about 15 minutes for questions, so feel free to type in your question into the chat box at the side of your screen there. And we have Nelson and Robert's information up on the screen. So like they mentioned, please contact them directly if you want to have any of the announcements about the project as they move forward. And so you'll get the announcements of when things are happening. And you'll be able to contact them further if you want to figure out how to bring them to your area, or if you had any follow-up questions for them. They're both, as you can probably tell, they're both very easy to talk to, and they are very excited about this. So they'd be happy to share and really push this project forward with any partners that want to come on board. Now, for those of you who are, many of you are high capacity users, do you notice in your organizations, particularly if you're working within a rural organization, do you notice that there's a big problem with just capacity and the capacity to work with data? Are you often trying to find outside consultants and other people? Give people a few minutes here to respond by chat.
What we found in our work with a number of community groups is the designated data experts in the organization get overloaded with data reporting requirements, and really don't have the freedom and the time to build data literacy across the organization, and that's our Big Data for Small Places program isn't trying to replace the data experts in the organization by any means, but it's providing ways to make the data expertise more useful across the organization. And, so we've had some interesting experiments with that, even in those organizations where they have a certain designated in-house expert in data.
Sorry, I think we're having a problem with our chat box. I can see people typing and I cannot see your chats coming up. So I'm going to, we're going to try something. Sorry, everybody. Oh, here we go. For some reason, they were just taking. Okay, so question from Judy was, do you see an application for this tool for municipal governments?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, our principal audience has been municipal municipal bodies at regional and local municipality levels. We also have significant interest coming from, in Ontario in particular, ministries that service those municipalities, like the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs and the Municipal Affairs, Ministry of Municipal Affairs in Ontario. So it's very much a significant audience for us, particularly in rural areas and small communities. So that, and I'm not sure.
So for the question about tool for municipal governments, the DART tool was developed primarily around the results of focus groups with staff at municipal governments, some community service organizations as well, and the commercial products that they had looked at for data integration, data visualization were either too expensive or too inflexible to really meet the needs of municipal administration, and that those are issues that we addressed specifically in the DART development.
Yeah, well, as we were developing this, both in the prototype and as we moved out of the prototype into the current version, we had ongoing consultation and feedback from a variety of municipalities, not just one. And we went to very small ones that had a small population to a fairly large, meaning 15,000 people. And then 3 cases, there were counties, the whole county was involved. So as we had the consultation sessions, we did them in person for the most part, although some of it was online. And we kept going back to them for clarification about certain aspects. So we're hoping that the version that we release of DART is going to be very well received by municipalities because of that process we went through. We're hoping.
So I see the question about a specific example. So one example was the understanding 911 calls and how to improve response rates. Another example we looked at from a similar system that was used by a city that we looked at that was doing some work with data visualization is they looked at the address of people who come to a hospital emergency department for non-emergency reasons. And once they put that data on a map, they saw there were neighborhoods where that were generating a very high percentage of the non-emergency visits. So that gave the department some insight into where to locate health clinics, what kinds of public health outreach work needed to be done and where it needed to be targeted. So it's that integration of data and then visualizing it on the map gives a level of understanding of local community problems, municipal problems that are difficult to do without that technology.
On the other, there's a question here from James. Okay, I'm not familiar with CCHS. Is that, oh, that's
the health data, I believe.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, I think it was just offering his perspective, his role, and what he's doing.
okay.
Okay. The other question about the relationship with the CDP, we've only had direct contact with one community data consortium in our area, and there was the people that were working with that were saying that the participating organizations now had access to a lot more data than what they were making use of, and they're just wondering about what the stumbling blocks were, that there wasn't more utilization of data by local organizations. And we, in our conversation, we suggested that perhaps some version of the Big Data for Small Places program would spread the data literacy across broader groups of people, and that the end results would be much more effective and much more widespread use of data by the members of the Community Data Consortium. So that was just one example of that we thought came up.
Maybe Mike can
quite
speak to this maybe Mike can speak to this as well, because Mike's been involved with a few of these discussions too. This is just sort of an initial beginning, and so we're really wondering, maybe this is a question to the audience too, is if you see how this could really benefit to have a formal partnership.
Could Mary, can I just add, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Mike, did you want to speak first?
I think I can see him typing right now, so.
Okay, oh, there he is.
Yeah, so this is going to come up at our annual meeting we made just in a couple weeks now in Calgary, and it's our one face-to-face meeting a year. And so this would be a chance for us to talk about what partnerships we want to explore. And so this is actually really great timing to have this webinar, because it means that it will be fresh in our minds 2 weeks from now. We'll have time to think about it and discuss it further. So please do that for everybody who's participating today. You know, what do you think a partnership could look like? There's obviously a lot of natural overlap between what we're doing and what Nelson and Robert have been working on.
We believe that as well. And in fact, part of the conversation we had early on with Michelle and with Mike was around the notion of the strategic plan that the community data program had, and in particular around data literacy, developing a better understanding of data and how to use it. And the Big Data for Small Places program kind of addresses that. And I would think that if we could work together going forward, it would be to take that, enhance it, perhaps make some aspects of it online, interactive, etc. I wanted to just also just mention to James, who asked the question about the Canadian Community Health Survey. James, I'd be interested in hearing from you if you want to take my email address there. It's on the screen. I work with a governance forum in this region of Ontario, and very much involved with the data question. So maybe we could have a chat offline. And there was, did we answer the other ones? I think so. Okay.
The other thing about the potential relationship with the community data program, we didn't emphasize this, but we have worked on the development of multiple versions of big data for small places for target audiences. And we've sketched out, it's been requested from a potential client, a fast track version of big data for small places for people that have already are already part way up the ladder in terms of data literacy, but would benefit from some of the resources that we've collected as part of the Big Data for Small Places program. So we do have a fast track version that's for moderate to advanced users. And then we have a very general introductory version that's just gives the flavor of the potential of using data for community use. It's a community orientation introductory session. So we've sketched out 3 different versions, and we're looking at entertaining requests for other versions that might be adapted to specific target groups. But certainly, talk among yourselves at your annual meeting in May and get back to us. And if there's some version of this that we can adapt specifically to your needs, or if you want, if we can license this to you as to make it a program, a version of that there be a program of your own, then we would talk about how that might work. We certainly would like to see more partners involved in this. The program was developed in response to needs that were expressed to us, and as other needs become more clear, we're quite able and willing to adapt it.
Also, I should just mention that both Nelson and I have been in our formal careers were involved in the education sector. I was with the Upper Canada District School Board, and prior to that, the Lanark County Board of Education, as a teacher, a school administrator, and eventually a supervisory officer. We're sensitive to the principles and practices of andragogy, adult learning. So we assume when people come to a new event, a new idea, that we first find out where they are with regards to what they already know. We don't assume that we have to start from the beginning. So that could be extremely positive in working with a group like yours, I think. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to this discussion we're going to have in May, because we will probably be meeting in person in Ontario next year in 2020. And so that might be an opportunity to actually have an in-person session with Bob and Nelson. So that's something we will definitely discuss coming up. We are coming to the end of our time together. So I'm going to formally wrap us up. So thank you very much to Nelson and to Bob. I think these are wonderful projects, and you can see how much work has gone into them. And I think that we can definitely benefit somewhere down the road here of coming together and doing something together. In the meantime, if anybody would like those updates on the projects as they're coming more available and more online, please directly contact. The emails are on your screen right now. Take a minute to write them down. We will make sure to get the slide decks up on our website. My colleague Julie is just on vacation now, so there'll be a little bit more delayed than usual, but you'll get an email letting you know when you can access those. In the meantime, if you're in a rush for them, you can always just ask Nelson and Bob. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating today. And thank you very much to my colleagues, Mike and Julie, who always help make this presentation actually come together. And thank you to Nelson and Bob for these presentations.
Thank you for letting us reach out to your audience. We have enjoyed it, and we're hoping to hear more.
Absolutely. And we will definitely be in touch with you, Bob and Nelson.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.